So I wanted to talk about the behavior triangle in charge syndrome. This is something that I and my research lab have worked on over a number of years as we further try to understand what are some of the things that lead to behavioral challenges in charge. So the behavioral phenotype kind of describes what the behavior looks like. With the behavior triangle, we're really trying to understand what are the sources of some of this behavior, which can also lead us to thinking about what are some of the interventions that we might try. So the triangle is obviously a triangle with three sides, and each point we've identified one of the issues that we're concerned about. So we have pain at the top, then sensory issues down in one corner, and anxiety in the other corner. And in the middle, we put self-regulation, because we think that learning to self-regulate is one of the ways that children are able to deal with pain, sensory issues, and anxiety. So I'll start talking about pain. We have found in some of our research that children with charge syndrome experience a great deal of pain. And I don't think this is always noticed, because they don't always know exactly how they're supposed to demonstrate that they're in pain. That's one issue, because if they're deaf-blind to any degree, they don't have a lot of models for how am I supposed to look, act when I'm in pain. But also because I think many of them have always experienced pain. They become kind of used to it. You know, as you get older, you get little aches and pains in a shoulder or in a knee or something like that. And you just get used to it and just plow on as long as you can, because it's just there. And most of the time you don't even notice it. But when the pain becomes really intense, then you go over the threshold, and suddenly the kids are demonstrating a great deal of pain through their behavior. The best way they have to communicate their pain is through their behavior. And so that's what we look for, to see if we can figure out what are the specific pain behaviors that these children demonstrate. Even if they're fairly vocal or can sign, it's still, they don't necessarily communicate it because they don't know that they should, and they don't necessarily notice how much pain they're experiencing. So why is pain so important? Well, we know it actually has an important impact on the brain and neurological development. The brain needs to have pretty much a healthy body in order to develop properly over the first 25 years of your life when the brain's actually developing. So pain gets in the way of that. So we don't know exactly what the brain differences might be, but we know that they're likely to be there. And so pain is extremely important for that. It also can affect sleep, because after all, we notice the pain the most at night. That's when all the other stimulation around us is kind of settled down. And so we're much more aware of our body. And, you know, when you're in a great deal of pain, it's really hard to sleep. Sleep is an issue for kids with charge for probably multiple reasons, but we suspect pain is one of them. And when you're in pain, how much do you want to go out and explore the environment and learn new things? I mean, when I'm in pain, I want nothing to do with the environment at all, let alone exploring it. So, you know, some of the problems that they may have at school, in a learning environment, or even at home, where they just don't want to go anywhere, when I just prefer maybe to just lie in their bed for the next 2 hours, can be due to pain, because pain's taking away their desire, their motivation to explore. It can also potentially interfere with the development of attachment and trust. Now, attachment relationship between a mother and a child in particular is often based on recognizing each other, which can be hard if one of them is deaf-blind. It can also be based on hearing the voice of somebody, which also can be hard when you're deaf-blind. And when the mother looks at the child and the child gives them that eye contact, where the child seems to be exploring the mom's face, that's a very important moment for the mom, especially, of course, if the child smiles at that moment. Kids with charge who may have coloboma, which are blocking their central visual field, may not be looking directly at the mom, and if the mom's not aware of that, may be hurt by the fact my child just never looks at me. There are many reasons why a kid with charge might not smile. One of them is facial palsy, which makes it difficult for them to actually turn the corners of their mouth up. But it may also be the lack of social models for when one is supposed to smile. So we know that from my earlier research that quite a few parents with charge indicate that detachment was very difficult to establish. This can be some of the reasons. And of course, if the kid's in pain, then, what are they looking for in terms of comforting? And do they get comforted when the parent doesn't even know that the child is in pain? So that pain experience may cause the child to withdraw more. As the child withdraws more, the parent feels less and less like there's an attachment relationship. Also, with pain, once it's tolerated, as I said before, a lot of these kids are tolerating pain because this is their constant experience. They may ignore it even when it's affecting their health, even when it's affecting their behavior, because they can't identify that, oh yeah, it's the pain that is causing this, because this is not a big change for them. Now, there are certain kinds of pain, like the sharp gas pain that a person might get, that can lead to specific behaviors that you see in the child. But a lot of the kids probably are ignoring it for a period of time, and then suddenly you see the behavior change. And you don't know whether the behavior is due to pain or just another behavior that the kid is showing. Finally, pain is communicated through behavior. My own son will often stick objects in his neck and wrench his neck on them. Another one of his pain behaviors is to walk around to the kitchen and the bathroom and open the faucets and put his hand underneath so that the water squirts everywhere. Another is to rub very hard on his forehead. So we become used to seeing these behaviors, and that's a good indication to us that Jacob's in pain, and we probably need to take him to the doctor. So that we'll say, and I'll probably say this again, always check out pain first, because if pain is what's causing the behavior and we ignore the behavior or try to change the behavior through other means, then obviously we're running into problems because we're never addressing the true cause. I had a friend who had a young man she was working with in an institution for people with cognitive impairments, and that this was a headbanger and banged his head all the time. And she tried all sorts of behavioral strategies to try to get him to stop banging his head, and nothing was working. And one day they took the people from the institution to a dental clinic and discovered that this person had severe impacted and infected teeth. And once those teeth were treated and fixed, the head banging went way down. By this time it was so well established you couldn't really break the habit very easily, but the number of times he banged his head was reduced. So again, we really want to attend to pain. Another issue is the sensory issues. Every single sensory system in a person with charge may be affected. Because of the high variability in charge, you can't guarantee that it's always affected, every one of them, but I would be suspicious that they probably are. Hearing, usually sensory hearing neural loss, but there are all sorts of there's conductive losses as well, so it's kind of hard to know. It's very hard to do an audiological exam because trying to rely on the child to tell you when they hear a beep may be actually impossible. So the audiologist may be looking for soft signs, which might actually just be random behaviors the child's engaging in. So it's very, very difficult to assess. But hearing is a very important sense. We learn so much from what we can hear from our environment. It warns us of danger. It tells us that people are trying to communicate with us. So extremely important. And then vision, of course. His vision is an interesting one because with coloboma, part of the visual field is blocked, usually the upper visual field and the upper and central. So much more on the peripheral side. So the kid may be looking right at you while their head is turned. It doesn't seem like that. The acuity for the child may be fine. So their vision, other than the blockages, is normal. And sometimes I've heard of parents going to see ophthalmologist or optometrist, and the person says, oh, their vision is normal. They should be able to see, without having done the retinal check and seen that the coloboma were actually blocking that vision. Of course, they may also have acuity problems in addition to the coloboma. The coloboma may be in different places in the eye, and that's really important to be able to sort out. Sense of smell, we learned from a French study quite a few years ago that most of the kids, well, everybody in their study had a problem with smell, either totally blocked or a reduced sense of smell. There are many reasons for this. The development of the nasal bulbs in utero may not happen correctly. The olfactory nerve may not go to the right place. So there are a number of reasons why the sense of smell is diminished. And that can also lead to problems with taste. And some of the kids with charge really like very strong tastes because those are things they can really notice. The tactile sense, your touch. You know, people with charge often have a great deal of sensitivity to touch. Light touch anywhere in their body can drive them crazy. If you're going to touch a kid or anybody with charge, firm touch is much to be desired. But also there may be particularly sensitive parts like the palms of the hands or the soles of the feet, sometimes in the trunk area, where if they're touched or they touch something, it's very difficult. I observed a girl one time who was supposed to be sticking her hand into some kind of gooey thing, but she was using a stick to touch the gooey stuff and hardly holding onto the stick because she was very, very sensitive. The vestibular sense is your balance sense, and we know that in charge is largely due to semicircular canals in your inner ear. These are the three circles of little bone, hollow bone actually, that tell you where your head is in space. And those are often either absent or deformed in charge. We also think that balance is affected by the cerebellum, but that's another area of research that's just really beginning to be established. So it's in terms of charge. So I can't say, I'm unwilling to say for sure that's impacted, but we think it may be impacted. And the proprioceptive sense is knowing where your body is. So if I asked you to wiggle your left big toe, most people could do that automatically. A kid with charge might have to stomp their foot for a little bit to find out where their large big toe is so they could actually wiggle it. So lots of the kids with charge like one of the reasons they like tight, hard touch is because of this. It tells them where their body is. Then sometimes like tight spaces, you may see a kid with charge crawl onto a shelf where they're just squeezed in between upper shelf and lower shelf, or into cabinets or someplace where they can completely kind of bound together. Or they may like to lie underneath a weighted blanket, because in these experiences, they can sense their body. They can sense all the different parts of their body. Now, the important thing here in terms of behavior is that the brain just sits in your head and can't do anything without sensory input. And so if the sensory systems are diminished, it causes the brain lots of problems. And one of the big problems is trying to integrate vision and touch and hearing and vestibular and all these different things so I can get a complete picture of what's going on in the environment. Each loss of a system doesn't just add to the problem, it multiplies the problem. That's why we say deaf-blind and not deaf and blind. Deaf and blind sounds like it's additive, but deaf-blind is multiplicative. It multiplies the impact. Each one of the additional senses multiplies the impact. So this is multisensory impairment stuff is very, very serious. And, you know, we really want to be sure that we can be consideration, but are sensitive to the sensory problems that the kids have and help them to utilize the senses but not become so terribly overwhelmed, because once they become overwhelmed, that's when they lose sensory control. I watched a girl with charge one time working out in the gym at her school, and she was doing an exercise where she was moving weights, and it was a very, very noisy environment. People were running by, they were playing loud music, people were shouting, and I just watched her. You could just see the change in expression in her face when it went from kind of relaxed to suddenly pained, and then more and more strained until she was screaming and completely out of control. So that's the problem, is the attempts for the brain to make sense out of the sensory situation. It can become so overwhelming that our kids can't hold it together anymore, and they just lose that behavioral control. The third part of the triangle is anxiety. So what do our kids have to be anxious about? You know, so much of what creates this anxiety is the unknown, right? I don't know what's happening. I don't know what's going to happen. I'm not terribly sure what just did happen, but I can't really plan for my day because I don't know what's involved in the day. Situations like that cause me anxiety and cause our kids with charge anxiety. And yet, because we can see and hear and use our senses, we forget that they don't know what's happening. And so your kid might be lying on their bed, and you know it's time to take them to the store, and you go in and you get them out of the bed and you escort them out of the house and into the car. They don't know where they're going, right? Unless you've been very, very clear using some kind of a calendar system or something like that. That, am I going 5 minutes to the store? Am I going 10 hours to visit grandma? What's happening right now? And that's when you begin to see a lot of anxious kinds of behaviors. It's one of the reasons why transition, as we said, with the phenotype is so difficult, because I don't know what I'm supposed to be transitioning to. And I'm perfectly content with what I'm doing now. What did you have in mind for me going forward? Anxious behaviors can appear in lots of different forms. And I've got a list here on the PowerPoint, but negative thinking patterns. But the one I've highlighted: anger, aggression, restlessness, irritability, tantrums, defiance. I didn't really realize a number of years ago how related all of that was to anxiety. When I'm anxious, do I act out in anger and aggression and restlessness? Well, perhaps I'm not really tuning into that, but this is clearly a really important outcome of anxious behavior, along with constant worrying, crying, physical complaints. So stomach aches, headaches, fatigue, which especially the stomach aches and the headaches may be related to pain, but they can also be created by anxiety, which makes this whole area really difficult to deal with, because you don't know what's pain, what's anxiety, what's just a sensory thing. Avoidance behaviors, again, sleeping difficulties occurs. Lots of reasons for sleeping difficulties. Perfectionism, not necessarily something I see in charge. Excessive clinginess and separation anxiety, procrastination, putting things off, poor memory and concentration. Withdrawal, I do see a lot in charge. And then eating disturbances. Our kids have eating disturbances because of the structural problems in their whole system, as well as the slow motility that they have. But some eating reluctance might be due to anxiety about this. I remember a parent describing to me some years ago about how she was taking her son to the doctor. And he was used to going to the doctor. He explained he was going to the doctor. He was fine with that. The thing that was not explained was that the doctor's office had moved, and now it was another couple miles down the road from where it had been. So they're driving towards the doctor's office, and they get to where the old office was, and her son expected her to turn in, and when she didn't, he began to lose behavioral control. He was shouting, screaming. He was hitting her he was sitting behind her, was hitting her shoulders. Why haven't you stopped? Why haven't you stopped? So I think she ultimately had to turn in there and explain to him, and then they could go on. But that's an example of really anxious behaviors, because I don't understand why we're not stopping there. You may have a kid who gets into a rut of saying the same thing over and over again. Are we going to Target? Are we going to Target? Are we going to Kmart? Whatever store you've got. I know you got Kmarts. So saying the same question over and over again, maybe because they don't know that's actually going to happen, because they're so unsure of themselves. So calendar systems become really, really important about this, but that's a whole nother discussion. So I put self-regulation in the middle. So what is self-regulation exactly? So one definition that my lab has used, and I'll try to go over this carefully, the primarily voluntary regulation. So we think it's primarily voluntary, the kids figure out how to regulate myself. There may be some involuntary, maybe your body learns how to regulate, like things like temperature, hunger, those kinds of things. It's primarily voluntary regulation of cognition, your thoughts, behavior, emotion, and the physiological states that you are in. Tired, sore, those kinds of things, for the purpose of goal-directed actions. So much of our behavior is goal-directed, so I want to accomplish something. And I have in mind what it is that I want to do, but I have to get my thoughts oriented towards it. I have to get my behavior under control so I can accomplish what I want. I have to have my emotions under control, so because if I'm too afraid or anxious, I might not do it. And I have to make sure that my body is fed well and feeling up to the task. So thinking about those, I think about self-regulation in each of the three areas we've discussed. So self-regulation of pain. So how can I regulate my experience of pain? Because part of the problem with pain is pain anxiety. I'm worried because I'm experiencing pain, and pain catastrophizing. I'm sure I'm going to die. I'm sure this is terrible. I'm sure I probably should go to the hospital. I'm not sure how many of our kids with charge are thinking about those things, but there's certainly some anxiety is going to be involved in pain, which makes it hard to self-regulate. We get tense, we feel distress, we get nervous, we get irritable when we're in pain. And stress is a huge problem for all of us, but stress is certainly impacted by the pain that you're experiencing at any given moment. So how do we self-regulate this? One thing is to work on changing our thoughts and expectations. So how can I think about the pain differently? Can I say things to myself like, this pain is manageable, or the doctor has looked at this pain, or I can talk to somebody about my pain, so that I'm not just feeling awful and catastrophizing, on my bed, just overcome by worry. Meditation is something else. Kids with charge are beginning to become much more involved in things like yoga and Tai Chi. We have that version of Tai Chi called Fun Chi, which Sharon Berry Grassick from Perth developed, and we've been using that in some of our research. And it seems to be very beneficial for kids to have more attention to what's going on around them. So various kinds of meditation, and also distraction. Lots of times we distract ourselves from things. I think if I see a kid engaged in a behavior which makes me very uncomfortable, I certainly try to distract them from that. But maybe teaching themselves how they can distract themselves and get involved in something that's going to take their mind off their pain. Self-regulation of sensory systems. I don't know any of you have seen a kid with charge hang upside down, but I asked one time on the Facebook page, the US Facebook page, I said, anybody have pictures of the kid hanging upside down? By the next day I had about 80 pictures. It's very, very common in charge for the kids to hang upside down. Why the heck do they do that? Well, for one thing, if you're trying to observe the world when you're hanging upside down, when you have the upper visual field blocked by coloboma, we tip our head back so that we can look forward. When you're hanging upside down, you don't need to do that. Your lower visual field is now primary and you can look straight ahead. So that's a really interesting solution. Also, if you're having vestibular problems so that it's hard to know how to keep your head straight, that's going to also be a muscular problem with floppy muscles of keeping my head straight. If I'm hanging upside down, my neck doesn't have to work to keep my head straight. It's just naturally hanging. And also, if I'm hanging upside down, I'm usually lying across something. In the picture, you've got, she's not doing that much. She's certainly experiencing gravity. But sometimes the proprioceptive sense kicks in when I have different parts of my body which are experiencing pressure. And so now I can actually feel them and know where they are. So that's actually self-regulation of the sensory system. Our kids figured this out all on their own. When you watch David Brown, if he goes through slides of different kinds of postures that the kids engage in, this is all self-regulation of the sensory system. I'm teaching myself how to handle it, which is anticipating here, which is one of the reasons we have to be very careful about trying to change a specific behavior in a kid. If I do have a kid with charge, if he hangs upside down, I'm not stopping him from doing that because I know this is working for him, and why would I want to take that away from him? Self-regulation of anxiety. So much of anxiety, as I said, is not knowing what's going to happen and when it's going to happen. One way that we all deal with that is by routine. You get up in the morning, you go through your morning routine. You go to work, you go through your work routine. You come home in the evening, you go through your evening routine. And you go to bed, you go to your bedtime routine. Now, one of the nice things about routine is it's predictable. I know what I'm going to be doing. When I wash up in the morning, I can remember I've got to comb my hair. I've got to brush my teeth. I've got to spray my nose with my allergy med, right? So I've got the certain kinds of things that I go through and do, and usually do them in the same order so I don't forget to do one of them. And we spend so much time kind of out of mind when we're going through our routine. Some people are not very well regulated with routine. My wife is one of those. She's learned to be much more routinized because of living with me. But if I'm out of town, routine kind of goes out the window. It's one of the reasons why I took over a lot of Jacob's direct care, because she could not remember. Every 2 hours we had to feed him when he was young. And I'd say, Nancy, have you fed him? Oh, no. Don't worry about it. I'll do it. 2 hours later, Nancy, did you feed him? Oh, no. Don't worry. I'll do it. And I just started doing it because I could keep myself on that kind of routine, and it's very difficult for her. But it really helps our kids. So whether a parent is well routinized or not, they probably would benefit their kid by going into a routine. We also know that calendar systems are wonderful, because if it's a visual calendar system and you can set it up for a period of time by putting pictures on the strip of what's going to happen next, and then use the finish box to show what has happened, the kids do so much better. I know a parent who we've told her for like 14 years, use a calendar system with your child, and she just didn't do it. And then about 2 years ago, she said to me, I finally did it, and it's wonderful. His behaviors have reduced so much. Well, you've reduced the anxiety because he knows